Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of Get Real with Kacey Kasem. It's the podcast that takes a look behind the scenes of the fantasy football industry through interviews with some of your favorites in the business. This episode features Jeremy Timperio, creator of Dynasty Daddy. We talked about so much on this episode, including how he grew up a Panthers and Hornets fan, how he got started playing fantasy football, what made him create Dynasty Daddy, the types of leagues he likes to play in, Cam Newton, avoiding burnout, and a ton more. Make sure to follow Jeremy on Twitter at DynastyDaddyFF. Also, check out his site, dynasty-daddy.com. You can follow me, Kacey Kasem, at @KaceyKasem, and the podcast at GetReal_pod. You can find my content with Roto-Baller, Fantasy Six-Pack, and South Harmon Fantasy Football. And check out SundayDreamersClub.com for some rad fantasy football-inspired t-shirts and sweatshirts. This podcast is a proud member of the DAP Network. And now, here's my chat with Jeremy Timperio on Get Real with Kacey Kasem. All right, here we are. I have a very special guest here today. Someone I don't really know that well in the fantasy space, but I'm really excited to get to know him more. So, Jeremy, thank you for coming on the show, for starters. I mean, you have a really awesome product with Dynasty Daddy, which we'll get into, but I just wanted to thank you again for coming on the show.
Well, yeah, I'm excited to be on here. And, I know usually I'm not, in front of the camera and doing things, but I was excited to come on the show. I've listened to it for a long time and now to be able to kind of talk about a different side of, fantasy content creation is also something that's exciting.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on because I do a lot of people that are in front of the camera or do, constantly there and you have a product that's kind of, we'll get into it. How about that? That's kind of like the spoiler for everybody out there. I know that's why you're listening, but we'll get to that. But for starters, Jeremy, when you were growing up, did you have a relationship with sports? Did you play sports, watch sports, or how did that go?
Yeah. So, I was born in Boston, but I moved to Charlotte when I was a year and a half old. So I grew up as a Panthers and a Hornets fan, which I wish I was a little bit older in Boston, so I could have been fans of those teams because my teams kind of stink. But just growing up, especially when I was young, when I was a early teen, we got Cam Newton, so that the Cam Newton Kuechly team, I remember that, and especially when I was really young, Musa Muhammad used to live in our neighborhood, so we his kid would play soccer with us, and he did kick a soccer ball and it hit my face really hard when I was a kid. So I do remember that. But yeah, I grew up a Panther fan, and we'd go to church, and especially when the teams were good, we had some of those Delome years, everyone would just have Panthers gear on and go home and you would watch football. So there was a good atmosphere there. It's not really here now, but I'm someone that you got to ride or die with your team. I'm not going to flip flop, and I'll cheer for other teams. I want to see other teams do good, but at the end of the day, it's all about the Panthers, which is kind of boring right now.
And we'll get into your fantasy football skills and your fantasy football life, but before that, has fantasy football made you become more of a fan of certain teams? I know you already have a team, but is there a team that you like right now because of the players that are on the team because of fantasy football?
Yeah, I would say the Bills, just because for two reasons. A lot of the old Panthers, GM and players, would go to the Bills, so everyone's just it's just basically cheering for the Panthers retirement home. But then too, I had Josh Allen in my friends league. That's the league I care about the most. I have a dynasty league. It's just all my college buddies, and I had Josh Allen and Diggs, which isn't a stack anymore, but was a stack for so long. So I was always just if the Bills did good, it meant I was doing the best in the league I care about the most. So it just became this thing of I want the Bills to do good, which they have been. They've been fun. They never get over the Kansas City hurdle, but not many teams do.
Yeah, that's true. Not many teams do. Well, okay, bringing up college, what was your college experience like? Why did you go to college? What did you go to college for? And how was that experience for you?
Yeah, so another tortured fan base. I went to NC State, but growing up, I started coding on Scratch and I used to make games on there. And I got somewhat popular on there. So I was like, okay, cool. I enjoy making games. People seem to like the games I make. So I was like, I'm going to go to a school nearby that has a good game development, computer science, engineering kind of concentration. So I did go to NC State for computer science with a concentration in video game development. And then, as I started getting through it, I was like, okay, cool. Like I enjoy making games still, but it's a lot of work. And also, I feel like kind of working in sports, right? Like everyone wants to work in sports. So like they can you have all these free internships, you have all these things like that. Everyone that goes into computer science kind of wants to make games. Everyone's like, I want to, I grew up playing all these games. I want to make games. So usually there's a lot of crunch. There's a lot of lower pay for those, especially entry level game development jobs. And I was just like, I don't know if I am that dedicated to making games versus just, taking a different software job. So I, didn't end up making games yet. I mean, I'm still young, so who knows, or maybe come around to it. But that's kind of what got me into NC State. It kind of made me really want to go there. And then also, I was like, being a Panthers fan, you always kind of like the underdog, and NC State was always a team I enjoyed. They weren't the Chapel Hill or the Duke, but we'll have a good run once every 41 years, and that's what we'll remember for the rest of our lives.
Okay, so talking about your first experience with fantasy football, how did you get involved playing fantasy football?
Yeah, that started sixth grade, I think. We had this like weird. I forgot what they called it, but at the end of instead of like a homeroom, they had like a class, like it was like a fun elective that was like 20 minutes. And at the end of the day, this one was like fantasy football. And I was like, well, I enjoy football. So I just signed up for it. And basically the teacher got away with teaching it because instead of, having it automatically calculate things, you just had to do your own math. So that was the whole class we did a draft and everyone's on their league and all that stuff. And then everyone just had to write out the scoring and everything and do the math themselves to see how the team scored and if they won. So that was kind of my first, and I was like, okay, this is really fun. I learned that Drew Brees was very good at football. I didn't realize how good he was at football until I was like, why is this guy like going so high in drafts and stuff? But that was the first time I was like, okay, I started understanding fantasy football, understanding the importance of scoring and things like that.
Yeah, man. And then to talk about the league that you're in, that you're, most proud of, the one that you are talking about with all your friends, how did that come about?
Yeah, so that was, it started because post-college, I got added to I picked up like an orphan in this free team with a bunch of people I don't know. And I was like, okay, this is cool. And then I spent all my free time, like going around trying to figure out how to build this team and win. And then I did win. And I was like, okay, this is cool. But like, it'd be really cool if I had like people that are my friends doing it. And one of the things I think that gets underrated about Dynasty as a format is like, I always feel like it's a start of year, especially in like home leagues and redraft, you're like scrambling, trying to find who's in your league. But it's like Dynasty, everyone's just like assumed to kind of be there. So you don't have to usually before I was in Dynasty leagues, I was like, crap, where's my fantasy leagues this year? Like I need to and I would like end up having like 3 leagues that start week 3 because I forget about this league or something like that. So it's nice to just kind of have it all everyone already is assumed to be here. All you have to do is just press pay and that's just a huge convenience to me. So I was like, okay, like let's do that. And then I a little bit I feel like I'm a phony because some people that use my site, have like 50 leads and are doing like massive portfolios. And it's like, to me, I'm sitting here, I'm like stressing out over like a few leagues. And I'm like sitting here, like really focusing on this one home league where like half the people, like there's like a quarter of them that don't even check it. Like, I had to tell this one dude to download Sleeper again so he could do a trade. And then like, so like, and then the other people do it, but like, when people aren't like tied into the community, they have a bunch of weird values where it's like, they want 2+ first for DK Metcalf or they'll give you a second for John Ross. And you're like, well, what is going on here? Like, so, but it's kind of fun because you kind of just, get the feel out that, just like a normal fantasy league where it's like when you play with people that are all in the community, you're like, okay, like it's kind of just a game of grinding out the margins and being more active.
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought up the whole redraft scrambling around trying to find the
Oh
people.
yeah,
That's definitely how it is. My home league is redraft. I'm not in a dynasty home league. I don't have any friends in a, like real life friends that hang out with me in a dynasty league, not my homies on the internet, but and so, yeah, and it is a completely different game when you're playing against people who don't constantly live and breathe fantasy football. Like it is like the draft. I was talking about this. Like
oh
you don't
yeah.
know kickers and this, that, and the other, and people are just taking guys wherever, and you're like, I did not prepare for
Yeah, I
this.
remember this was one of the smarter guys, and it's not the worst looking back on it, but he took like James Cook at 103, I think, in a rookie draft, and it was an IDP league as well. He took like Micah Parsons in the first, and we're like, what are you doing, man? But he did make the playoffs 2 years in a row, so he's turned it around. But yeah. I don't know, it's definitely fun, and it's just nice to not have to worry about scrambling for things. Like that's such a huge like stressor at the beginning of the year that usually I just get overwhelmed. I'm like, okay, I'm just not going to worry about it. But now it's like, okay, cool. I have some leagues. If I'm lazy, they'll just auto renew, and I can just not have to worry about like pinging people. Yeah. And now I've been trying to do. For that league is we do like an in-person draft. We've done it 2 years in a row. So we have a third one coming up in July, which those are always fun as well. And that, just trying to probably pour too much time into just trying to keep the league active and things like that. But it's fun to kind of have that like community of friends. That's kind of the core of what it's about.
Yeah, that definitely is such an awesome part of fantasy football. And when you do a live draft, what's your favorite part or parts of the live draft experience?
I mean, for me, it's probably just like, I obviously like trash talk's always fun, but like, I think a lot of it's just kind of like, I get to see a lot of my friends from college that I probably wouldn't have seen. Like usually like it's hard. Like I have like a core group, right? Like my core friends I get to see all the time, but it's really nice to just have something that we can all come back to, and someone I might not have talked to since the last wedding that everyone was invited to. Like there's something that kind of keeps our lives like, connected, which is nice. So like that's something I think from like a personal level that makes me want to invest in it so much. Just cause like, I know it's a way for me to kind of stay in contact with all these people that, I did really care about. But, like once you graduate college, everyone kind of goes their own way. Everyone has their own stage in life. It's kind of nice to have a weekend where you just get to kind of rewind the clock and just be college kids for a bit. And then, there's a draft there too. And then, and the rules meetings, those get tense. Those are the fun ones because everyone's like trying to like, there's all the casual people that are trying to like put in kickers and put in silly rules. And then there's all the people that care too much. And it's just great.
Rules meetings. Yeah. See, I've never actually gotten to sit down and do anything like that. So that sounds like it would be chaotic.
Oh yeah, no, it's because it's always like last year someone made a PowerPoint for kickers, and it was just like, and they presented the kickers, and everyone's just like, and they lost by 1 vote. So I'm nervous this year they're going to get the kickers in. So
yeah. So when you first started playing fantasy football, was it Dynasty that you started with, redraft, or what kind of got you started?
Yeah, I just played redraft for years. It's kind of, I played redraft in middle school and high school and most of college. And a lot of it was just kind of, I would go on NFL.com fantasy and just join a random league because, I didn't have a ton of friends that wanted to play fantasy and things like that. So I was like, okay, like I'll just join it, be something that I can kind of just micromanage on the side and kind of have fun if my team's doing bad. And then, I got in college, I got into, some like, there was like a church league I joined, but I didn't go to the church. And then, just like friends leagues. And it kind of got to a point where it's like, okay, I heard about this Dynasty thing. This could be fun. And then that's kind of how I picked up that orphan in one of my friends' leagues. And after that, I was like, okay, I need to have a Dynasty league where people actually care about it. And then it would be really fun.
For sure. Yeah. I wish my friends like Dynasty so much. Like getting them to do a redraft league is one thing, but trying to get them to play Dynasty, I don't know. I got like 2, and you can only do so much when 2 people want to play.
Yeah, it's 2 like on top of it. Like Dynasty, the most fun in Dynasty is the trades, right? Yeah. Like when you're and it's so fun when and it's like a group of friends and you see that trade notification go through and everyone's just like, starts popping off about it. Like that's something that a redraft league just never really has. Like you might have like one trade a year and it's usually just some weird trade and you're like, whatever. Or it's just like obvious collusion. Like someone's like, here's Christian McCaffrey. I'm already out of the playoffs. So like, Dynasty is like such a good format for just constant activity and also just those trades, which make it such a more engaging experience. Whereas like most redraft leagues just comes down to, did I hit on my draft and can I pick up some value on the waiver wire?
Yeah, it was a whole different ball game when I switched to playing mainly Dynasty. I was scared because of the trading aspect. I'm like, I don't really know what I'm doing because, like you said, redraft, not a lot of trading going on in there. I think I made like 2 trades the entire time I've played.
Yeah.
That's just how it is. So I totally get that. And for people who are wanting to start playing Dynasty that play redraft right now and they just kind of don't know how to get started, or like maybe they're even like a little timid to play, what kind of advice do you have for newbies to the Dynasty game?
Well, I mean, I think ultimately you just got to jump in and do it. I think there's plenty of free leagues. I mean, that's how I started. I'm just cheap. I'm such a cheap person. So I'm like, hey, if nothing's on the line, then I can get my feet wet. And I don't want to I get like not wanting to go in and make a mistake. But it's like, who cares if it's a free league? Like if you make a mistake, it's like, okay, there's nothing I really lost there. So I mean, if that's something that people are afraid of just, like I'm scared of messing up, I'm scared of doing that. Like just go in, to a free league and just, play around with it and be like, okay, even if I make the worst trade of all time, like I'm still going to wake up tomorrow. So it's like the stakes aren't really that high. And even I think the biggest thing with Dynasty is like if you make one trade a year, if that trade's bad, then like you're screwed. But it's like, like if I look, like I added that trade tree thing. I was looking at some of my old trades. I'm like some of these are awful. I'm like, what was I thinking? But then it's like, you can still kind of course correct. And like at the end of the day, you get to where you're going. So as long as you have a process, and even if you don't have a great process, as long as you're trying to come up with some sort of process and stick to that, then I think think it'll be rewarding regardless of if you lose a trade on a trade calculator.
Yeah, for sure. And you don't remember, I mean, I don't remember half the trades I've made. I don't know if I won them at the time. I may have thought I lost, and then it ends up 3 years down the road and it actually worked out. So that's how I have to tell myself things are going to be, everything's going to be all right. Yeah. So let's talk more about, or let's actually start talking about Dynasty Daddy and that whole idea. Like, how did the idea come to you? What led you up to creating that?
Yeah. So, I mean, at this point, it's like a mess of like thousands of ideas, but it started because I was starting a new job and it was using a new technology. So like, I was like, okay, like I should probably learn this new technology for my job. So I saw a Dynasty Ranker. I don't know if it's still a site, but I saw someone post on Reddit about that. I was like, okay, I feel like I could make something like this. I know the APIs are public and I've always wanted to do something with fantasy or like just football data. But I was like, I like made a site that just shows stats. I'm like, well, that's like a million sites do that. So like, what could I do that's somewhat useful? So it kind of just started as like a learning experience. And I had it on my computer. It was just like this, like wasn't hosted public, but it got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm a software engineer. I probably should know how to build a full website end to end. Like usually in a day job as a software engineer, you're like, okay, I work on this one team that services this, that works in this giant product of, 50 teams or something. So it's not like I have the experience of going from, nothing to a site that's online that you can actually access on the internet. So I was like, okay, like that's something that was one of my goals. So I was like, okay, let me try to host this. And then, it just kind of became something I was like, let me host it. And a big driving part of the fantasy ideas, especially early on, was I would post weekly power rankings in our group chat for that one league. And I was like, it would be cool if I could do it like this, if I could show something like this. I know the playoff calculator tool, which is like a league simulator. I really enjoyed like the 538 kind of visuals and way of like handling different types of like playoff simulations. So I was like, okay, what if I made something like that for fantasy? and then be able to just show off like, okay, this game, like the odds shifted by this much, or like if you win this game, you get 5% chance to make the playoffs or something. It's just like little tools of like, how could I make people more engaged, more excited about their, this league I was in. And then it got to a point where I was like, okay, there's so much here. I need to just like post it and then start kind of iterating off of there. But I mean, the first year and a half, I mean, I think before I even hosted it, like the first 6 months, and only I used it. And I would run the script every day, every morning. I would scrape and get all the data. And then now it's, the next 6 months, it was like only a bunch of weirdos. I don't know how they found it because I didn't post it anywhere. I just had this random link that said Dynasty Daddy, and people were clicking on it apparently. So somehow some people found it, but I had like 10 users. I was like, oh, like thanks for coming by. Like I didn't even know you, but thank you for using my site. And then I posted it on Reddit about a year and a half ago or so. And then that's kind of when, after that, everyone's like, oh, like, people really started picking up on it because I was always a lurker on Reddit, but that's kind of where I got my fantasy knowledge. I was just go through like the Dynasty FF community and things like that. But I was like, okay, if I post this, I feel like I would get some people that would engage with it. And that first post, just flew up like the hot or whatever, the trending board. And I got a lot of people looking at my site.
That's pretty rad. That's pretty rad. And yeah, Reddit isn't something that I utilize all that often, but I'm glad that you brought that up because I think a lot of us get focused on just Twitter, and there's so many different other ways to get your content out or to get your product out and to get people's eyes on it. So it's cool that you brought that up. How did you continue to get more people involved in what you were doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's kind of tough. I mean, there's a lot of things, right? Like one thing I saw is like, there's a lot of sites out there that offered similar things to me. But I think a lot of my advantage was like, I was the developer making it, right? Where it's like a lot of people either contract out developers or they are the developer, but they are doing other things. And I was like, if I just focus on building tools I enjoy and then like also trying to make it as user-friendly as I can, I think people resonate with that. And I mean, originally when I started, even when I first posted it, I wasn't like, oh, like this will be something like that, I could actually make money off of or have people care about, like, to where it is now. So I just kind of like, okay, cool. Like, it just started out was like, I want to solve interesting problems and build cool tools. And a lot of it too was just kind of consolidating things and ideas I saw from other sites that were kind of either old or out of date, or be like, oh, I like this, but like, what if I took it and did all this other thing with it? So that was kind of just me just playing around and trying to build a tool that I wanted to use. Because I hated when I was doing fantasy research, I would have like 50 tabs open and I'd be like going between everything. I was like, I don't want to deal with that. I want to have one tab, just go one place and just have everything I need. So that was kind of, every time I opened up a new page, I'd be like, okay, how can I, like, why am I here? What am I using this data for? What am I using this information for? Is there something I could do to do that on my site? So that was kind of the original ideation of that. And then and as it grew, then it became a lot of just maintenance bug. People have issues with this, people have issues with that. And it's, as one person, it's not like I can, I don't have a full QA team. That's so like, I know when I push something, there's going to be issues and I need to be responsive, but that's something too I wanted to be, because I felt like a lot of sites in the community, it's hard to kind of reach the person that makes it, or like, and that's why I had the Discord and try to make it to where it's really easy for people to reach out to me and say, hey, this is wrong, what's going on? Or like, this is cool. Or, just like, here's an idea I have. Because I feel like if I'm engaging in that way, then like people will somewhat invest in what I'm doing and like care about what I'm doing beyond just like, oh, this is one website I use. Be like, okay, like there's kind of this person, there's a community that they can, join and ask fantasy questions, but also give me feedback and see, and I try to be very quick with it too. If it's something I can fix quickly, I'll try to fix it really quickly and get it back to them. So they're like, okay, cool. Like now that it's not broken, now it's fixed. And I think that's kind of how I built trust with a lot of the early adopters of my website.
Yeah, for sure. Like building that trust is so important. And I'm sure that it's not a walk in the park for you all the time, and there are issues that arise and everything. What have you found to be like one of the most difficult things you've had to maneuver to kind of make sure everything runs smoothly? Maybe a hiccup or something that you've had to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably, trying to think. I mean, the first thing would be the integrations. Like, not many integrations from what I can tell. Like, I'm not gonna say I'm have the best integrations, but I think my integrations are some of the more intense in the sports sites out there. So like, I pull so much data and so many things, and if one thing changes, it might cause issues with certain parts of the integration, because I use dozens of APIs when you log into your league. So I can pull back your drafts, your transactions, all these things. And so there's a lot of times where something will break just because there's like a really weird league format, or this API, API of this one site isn't documented. Like, that's a big issue. A lot of it is me going to a website and just poking around and trying to figure out how, if I want to get this data, how do I get it? None of this stuff is really documented. Like, Sleeper has pretty good documentation, but a lot of the other sites are very undocumented on what they do, or they're documented of like, if you hit this, you might get a response like this, but they don't tell you all the different endpoints. So you're like, okay, cool. Like, this is live, let's go. And then, 6 months down the line, someone's like, I have a league with no quarterbacks and now it's blowing up. And you're like, okay, well, I didn't know that was a thing. Like, there's a bunch of different formats and different leagues I have to, take into consideration. So being able to support all the different formats, and not just the formats, but how the data is being, transferred to me, is kind of difficult to always catch everything. So that's something I'm constantly working on and trying to. And usually it's a pretty quick fix. Usually it's just like, okay, like this value was, this value wasn't there and it was expecting it, and now it's upset. So I just have to go in and handle that. But sometimes it's more, like just API's weird. I remember one time MFL was down one day, like, then that blew up everything. And then another thing was like the trivia stuff. When I first released the grid, I was the first site to my knowledge that had a football related grid. And that kind of went low-key viral. And then I was sitting there on like a super cheap, like the cheapest tier of like server. And then all of a sudden I'm like sitting there being like, I don't think I'm going to be able to like maintain the traffic I'm seeing without this. So I'm like having to upgrade the servers, and there's downtime because like my CPU usage is maxing out. So there's a bunch of like the technical thing of scaling up, having all these people using my site for that was a stressful time.
Yeah, that sounds like it's stressful. That's way too much for me. But I'll tell you something that's not stressful is your Patreon. It's actually a delight. So you can't see this right now, but I do have a nice little Dynasty Daddy app up over here. I got the whole rankings of my team telling me that I'm a fraud and a couple of other things. But it's okay. It's okay. I got some good draft capital, so it'll be all right. But yeah, can you tell more people more about like the Patreon and kind of what comes with that?
Yeah, so a big part of the Patreon originally to me started out as I want to make money, but I want to provide a value. And it took a while for me to really get to a point where I was like, I feel comfortable, with kind of adding ads and things like that. So I was like, if I want to add ads, I want to have people to have the option to opt out of ads. That was a big thing for me. I was like, and the way to do that would be to have some sort of accounts. But by the time, I'm cheap. I'm not making a lot of money off of my site. And in order to have integrated accounts into my platform, I would have hit the user threshold really quickly and be paying thousands of dollars a month to support all the accounts and users. So I was like, okay, I'm going to just use some Patreon integration and use that kind of to manage accounts and make things a little more convenient. That's kind of how I like to see it. Just because I think I don't want to put everything behind a paywall, because I want people to use my site, but I want people to want to have a little bit more convenience, to not have ads, to kind of be able to use like the cross-platform league management tool. That's something I can't do without having accounts, is a way to link all the accounts to you. Different methods like that of saying, by saving your data that you created, does that make things more convenient? So that's kind of the way I was looking at it, is like, just a way to enhance it, not to kind of block things on my site from being used. And I do want to continue that way. Like a lot of my paid features, I want to eventually become free features, and as new paid features come in. So it's more of like, as I'm starting to get more confident with certain tools, then I can roll them out to the public. But it also depends like on things that people care about, like I do want to have enough value at the Patreon tier that people do want to join it and say that, yes, it is worth it. But I also don't want to be like, like a site where it's like, okay, like you clicked 2 links and now you have to pay, a bunch of money to be able to access just like generic tools. So I don't see myself ever really paywalling most of my tools, because I think that is my advantage. Like my value to the community is making tools. And if I just put that behind the paywall, then I'm not going to be adding as much value to the community. So it's kind of finding that balance.
Hey everyone, Kacey Kasem here. I want to take a moment to tell you about Sunday Dreamers Club, my fantasy football inspired t-shirt store. If you're looking for unique, stylish, and comfortable apparel that showcases your love for fantasy football, look no further than sundaydreamersclub.com. Whether you're gearing up for the next big game, hosting a draft party, or just want to sport some awesome gear, Sunday Dreamers Club has got you covered. With a variety of designs and styles to choose from, there's something for every fantasy football fan out there. Your support means the world to me, and there are so many ways you can help me grow this new small business. Grab a shirt or two for yourself or as a gift for your fantasy football league mates, or you can spread the word to your friends and family. Every bit helps, and I truly appreciate your support. Thanks for listening, and now let's get back to the show. And I have to back the Patreon and say, like, Dynasty Daddy itself is just like a great tool for somebody that loves to make trades. It's like A+ to be able to go on there and just kind of get a feel for what your league is, because you don't always realize even what the makeup of this team is. Like, do they really have great? Oh, look, they do. They have great quarterbacks, and I have no quarterbacks. I need to get a quarterback from one, So it's a great tool to use, and I appreciate it a lot. I know that you have a lot of new things that have just come out with it over, the months, and you're constantly adding to it. But what are some of the newer features that have been added to Dynasty Daddy?
Yeah. So, I think a big one recently was I revamped a lot of the mock draft stuff to where it's now what it used to be was just kind of like this clunky table. And now it's a full on like sleeper-esque draft board. Where you can filter, you can search, you can do your own live drafts. So I did roll that out like a week or so ago for the drafts and get everyone hyped about it. So that's been good. I mean, that's been a very, very challenging project itself, just technically wise and getting all the integrations up to snuff. But I think that's been something I wanted to kind of capitalize on more, because I was like, okay, I should do that. But like mid-season, I was like, it doesn't really matter. No one would care if I did that. But I was like, I want to make sure next draft season, people not only see my site as, okay, like, let me go check my power rankings, but now let me go and do my draft research there. Kind of understand ADP, understand, like how the draft board looks, the tiers and the trends and things like that. So that was a big feature I recently released. And I got a lot of good positive feedback from that. And then another one a little bit prior to that was the trade tree, which I know a lot of people like that. But I mean, it's basically just take all your trades from the past 2 years and just make this, hopefully, if it's an active league, a giant mess of circles and lines pointing to, like, from digesting all the trades you have. And at first I was like, okay, I don't know how useful or interesting this would be, because I thought it would just be kind of this trade over here and this, like, just a bunch of random trades just in a different visual. But it's been fun to kind of just see all these different types of trades and just like blobs of different players moved around. Especially with, like, I know in one of my leagues, I traded away DeAndre Hopkins and then traded for him again and then traded him away. So it's like, you just create these mazes of just all these different players. And it's just a fun visual. But I know it's a cool way to just kind of see I did this trade, but kind of what did it lead to and what did I get out of it, to kind of see how the process plays out.
And you have, like, I love playing games. So you had brought up the game portion of Dynasty Daddy, and why did you decide that to add game options on there? Because it's super dope, but I would have never thought to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't any sort of business decision or anything. It literally was just I my friends would post in one of our group chats the Immaculate Grid, the MLB one. And I was just like, man, like, I don't know anything about MLB. So I felt really left out. I was like, this would be fun if it was football. So I was like, okay. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to wait. That was my first thing. I was like, I'm going to take a couple weeks and wait and just let someone else do it. And I know it's out there. I know someone's working on it. And then I was like, eventually I waited a couple weeks and I was like, this is dumb. Like, I'm just going to knock it out. So it was just like one weekend or so. I was like, okay, let me just get something out there. So then like now there would be a football grid. But I do think it also kind of opened up my site to a brand new audience, which I thought was really interesting. And something I never even considered to begin with. And it provided a different way for me to also support my site like long term, which is interesting. Which like fantasy, like especially hardcore dynasty, like I would get good traffic and good numbers, but it's a very seasonal game. Whereas like trivia is much more consistent and much more like broad, which also helps because a big part of a site, similar to YouTube or anything, is search. Where do you rank in search? How do people find your site? How do people find the content you're making? In Dynasty Daddy, a lot of it was just through Reddit or like people on podcasts using it and people being like, that's a cool site. What is that? Like, and while that is nice, I love it when I go on, watch a show and they're like talking about my site or using it. Like, I love it. It's not like the most sustainable for building an audience. It's kind of like, I hope this guy shouts me out, or I hope, like I have to make a Reddit post, but not get banned by the mods because I'm spamming or something. So I was like, okay, like being able to rank high on certain things like Immaculate Grid, NFL Wordle and, NFL connections or football connections, like those terms get a lot of traffic, and getting those people to come to my site and then they, I don't know what the conversion rate is, but I'm sure there's people converting over and using my tools as well for fantasy on top of just using, my trivia side. But it's definitely been fun too, because it's nice. Sometimes I just get sick of dealing with fantasy integrations and stuff. So it's like, I can just jump and work on a trivia game or something and then go back. Having different ways to kind of avoid burnout also helps.
Yeah. Yeah. Bringing up the avoiding burnout part, because I've done that a few times in my short life in the fantasy football world. And I'm sure I'll do it a few more times before it's over with. But yeah, like, how are some other ways that you avoid like burning out on it and not enjoying what you're doing? How do you avoid that?
Yeah, I think like, in full disclosure, there's definitely times I'm burnt out, and like I think like my real person job is also like coding. So there's times where like like today where I'm like doing a lot of work like at my job, and then it's like, okay, do I want to do a bunch of additional work after work on my site? Like, I don't know if that's really what I want to do. So it's a lot of kind of like finding what motivates me. And I think I have 3 ways of doing that for Dynasty Daddy of like, do I want to build a fantasy tool? Because if I'm really into fantasy, I'm like, okay, this could be cool. Like the trade trees. I was like, okay, that would be really cool to build that and have that visual. Like, I don't think that's anywhere out there. It's something really unique. So I was like, okay, cool. Like, that was motivating for me. So it's like, okay, I can deal with being burnt out on the coding part if I can see kind of this idea I want to realize. But then sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm sick of dealing with, fantasy football things, but the technical challenge from like a software perspective is really interesting. Like a trade database and building that and having it update with new trades and having ways to quickly filter and find things. Like, technically that was a really interesting challenge. It's not the most, unique or interesting fantasy related thing, but, I thought it was fun to kind of technically be able, like, I can do something like that and also figure out ways to add my own spin to it and make it, more useful than others on the market, which I think is interesting. And then like fantasy or like the trivia games also play into that, where it's like, I'm sick of both, but then I can just like come up with some trivia game. But the trivia is harder. I feel like that one is, it's hard to know like when I have a game that's worth making. Because to me, the one thing I don't want to do is have to wake up every morning and be like, what is the game going to be tomorrow? And like design it. Like, I don't want to have to do that. I would like to be able to if I want to, but I don't want to have to like wake up every day and design a bunch of games. Like I want to be able to have something that's repeatable, and I can just make like some sort of algorithm that generates a game every day, so that I don't have to worry about this is going to be the thing for today. So that's always my first thought when I'm thinking about a game is like, is it something that I can just once I finish, I don't have to like micromanage every day. It can just be its own thing. So that kind of takes out a lot of the general, like, like who scored this many fantasy points? Like, because it's like there's only so many times you can do that.
Right.
So it's coming up with unique, repeatable games is kind of the hard challenge there.
Yeah. Yeah. That is way too much again. Like I could like bow down to you. No, I'm saying, I mean, I would not be able to, like, I know you and I are different people. So, but yeah, like, when people come on here and they're talking about all this stuff that they do, and I'm just like, wow. I mean, because you're able to yeah, you have to come up with ideas for all this stuff, and it's that doesn't just magically happen. So that's a lot of work to do all of that. But I know in the future you're going to have more and more, like as you said, you're coming up with more stuff and all of that. How do you continue to come? Do you have like ideas you write down? How do you keep track of what you want to put out in the future?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, a lot of it is I have like a rough outline of what like potential goals I would like to see. Like, I'm like, okay, this is kind of where I want to be in 6 months. This is kind of where I want to be in 6 months. So then I try to figure out ways to do that. But then some of them just come up out of random, right? Like I saw a Reddit thread of like, what are tools you would like to see? And one of the most common ones, it wasn't the highest upvoted, but I saw like 4 or 5 different people say like a trade tree of some kind. So I was like, okay, like there's a demand here. I'm just going to do that. So some of it's like I just stumble upon a certain article or Reddit post or something like that. But other times it's like, kind of bigger things like integrations. I do a lot of research beforehand of just saying, okay, can I get all these APIs? Can I connect? Is this something I can reasonably do? Those also just take like a lot of mental work because those just are not fun. It's not very fun to mess around with APIs and make a bunch of fake leagues and hope that everything works right. But I do know a lot of people appreciate it because it expands my market, right? Like a lot of people, like people that were using Yahoo every time I would post would be like, can you add Yahoo? So I was like, okay, I need to do that eventually. So it's like, okay, now I added Yahoo. So now next time I post and everyone sees it, like there's a brand new audience that can use my site. And that's something that from like a growth perspective is important. So that I try to sprinkle those in where it's like, like I know people keep asking me for like fan tracks. So it's like, okay, like I'll start looking into that. But then I have to put that in between things that motivate me. Right. Because I'm like, I know that week's going to suck when I have to deal with that, but I know a lot of people will appreciate it. So it's kind of like, I know like for the league format tool, that was probably the worst thing ever because I had 5 different fantasy integrations at the time. And I had to go through and look at all the scoring settings and how they present the data and then map them. And a lot of times it's just like a number. It's like, it'll be like 57 equals 0.5. And you're like, okay, well, there's no documentation what 57 means. So I'm like trying to research all these random blog posts and different like code bases and trying to find, does anyone know what this 57 means? And it'd be like, oh, this is actually like, this is PPR scoring. And you're like, oh, okay. Like, and I had to do it for everything. And like, those are very tedious. Yeah. So there's a lot of like that stuff that really sucks. But, when I think of ideas, like I do just have like a notepad of just random things I try to write down. If I'm like, okay, this could be cool. This is something that I think would be impactful to the community. This is, a game idea I think I should look into. And then if I'm just like tired or brain dead, and just want to kind of scroll on Twitter or something, I can just do a little bit of research and look into that while I'm on my phone watching TV or something. That way I can still be productive but not have to like be like heads down coding the whole time.
Right. Did you ever think that that it would take off the way that it has? Or when you first started it, I know you were doing it for you to start with, but like did you ever think it would grow to be where it is now?
No, I mean, that's straight up no. Like it's still crazy to think. Like I remember when I made games on Scratch back in the day, I remember I would get on the front page. I would get, like I would get like 50,000 viewers. I'd be like, wow, like I'm probably never going to like be like this public facing again. Like, like I'm not going to do anything that's like this popular, right? I'll do things like I'm a creative person, but like being creative and building something and then having people like really resonate and rally behind it's a very different thing. So having it to where it is now, like, especially after like a year and a half after really like launching it is beyond me. Like I never thought I would be here. I never thought people would want me like on a show for like this website I built. I never thought I would have, I have like almost 800 people in like the Discord. Like I never thought I would have like people really rallying behind something I built to this level, which is really cool. Because it's very motivating now. Like now it's much easier to get motivated because I'm like, I know if I release something, I'm going to have all these people being like, oh, this is really cool. Like all this stuff. Whereas like before is like, I would only, I would work on it like maybe once a week, but now it's like, I'm working on it literally every day just because it's so easy for me to do and want to do. Because like the reward is just, it's easy payoff.
Yeah, for sure. And it is so awesome to have like just a group of people that appreciate the content you're putting out or whatever you're working on. Because, if you feel like you're just doing it and you're doing it for yourself, that's awesome. But when other people are also jazzed like you are, it's so good to have that feeling. It's so good to have those people. And you had brought up people like bringing it up on their podcast, talking about the website and bringing it up like that. Do you consume fantasy football content, or how do you get your fantasy football content?
Yeah, I mean, I try to listen to a lot of content. A lot of times there's kind of two edges to it, right? It's like one of it is I enjoy it. Like I enjoy the fantasy talk. And the other part is kind of like research, right? Like like what are they talking about? What are people kind of trying to say is important for decision making and making actionable advice? And are those things that I can tie into my site? So there's that part of like, okay, like, but I listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm doing real work or working on my fantasy site. And I'll just, I try to listen to a bunch of people. So I'm not like too in one circle where it's like, I, can't kind of see, the forest from the trees, but I listen to a ton of shows, and I think it helps because I want my sites to be just like, how shows are to their community, where it's like they're catering to their community. I want my site to not just be kind of like this weird monolith that you use and you don't know what's going on. Like I want mine to try to cater to the people that really do care about this stuff, because I know those are the people that I really want. Like I don't want to have to buy advertisements and be like, check out my site, like use my promo code. Like I want people to just use my site because they love it. Like that's the biggest reward for me, is when people are just like I love this site. This is the best. And I'm like, okay, like that's what I'm going for. And like, that's part of it. I mean, I could totally put a bunch of things behind paywalls and have made more money than I have now. But I also think that's part of, I think long-term it's better to be honest and get that trust from my community and get people really rallied behind it. Because I think long-term that audience will be, and having a solid user base as a website is a huge value. It gets me in a lot of doors I never thought I would be in. So
yeah, I am a big fan. I'm a big fan. Like I can back it 100%. The site is great. Like I don't know how I stumbled across it. I know it was on Twitter. But I'm not exactly sure like how I found it, but I mean, people are always talking about it, so I'm sure it just came across. But it is such a great, and it's so user friendly, and it's just colorful and nice, and you just did a great job with everything, like for sure. And I don't sound like I'm like fangirling over here, but I like use the tool all the time. I use the tools all the time, so I can totally back this up. And I'm so glad that I was able to get you on the show. We're not ending right now. I know it sounds like I'm wrapping up, but I'm just kind of giving you a lot of pat on the back, like it's so cool to see like new tools. I love it when something comes out and you can just go in and play around with it and kind of, find something that you like. So wanted to thank you for that. We just had the NFL draft. So, I mean, are you a draft guy? Do you like watching the draft? Do you follow college players? How does that go with you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an NC State fan, so definitely watch a lot of ACC football, which isn't the best situation right now. But yeah, I mean, I watched the NFL draft. I didn't watch as much as I did last year, but life gets busy. But the first round is must watch TV. I mean, that's especially after after the playoffs are over and I'm starving for any sort of NFL content, like having the draft and what everyone's been talking about for the past 3 months finally happen, is always like one of my favorite things.
Yeah. I don't follow any college, and I still love watching the draft. And don't ask me for any opinions on anything, but it's fun. It's fun. And I can comment on the sunglasses they're wearing and be like, oh, those are some dope shades, but that's about all you get from me. And then when it comes to like fantasy football settings that you like, or like league types, or just anything that, even if it's just like a wrinkle that's been thrown in, is there something in particular that you like about fantasy football that is your go-to kind of league?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably pretty basic when it comes to fantasy. Unfortunately, one of the things that has come with this site is I have more responsibilities now outside of just managing fantasy teams. So I've had to scale back a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I enjoy like just like a 12-team Superflex. I feel like Superflex is like the biggest value add in the recent years. Just like 2 quarterbacks makes that position, which is the most popular position, actually matter, which is really interesting from a strategy perspective. Whereas like if you look at most leagues that are just like 1 QB, it's literally just running back and wide receiver. So I like Superflex a lot. Tight end premium, I'm a fan of as well, but I know it scares a lot of people away because it can be intimidating. It's kind of hard to value tight ends, but just like if it's a PPR league, my favorite's like a half PPR. I think half PPR is best because PPR can really give a lot of advantage to wide receivers, especially with the way committee running backs are now. Like I feel like half PPR is kind of the best way to go.
Yeah. For sure. I'm like, as I'm writing this down, I'm like, yes, for sure. Also, well, because I wanted to talk about like your leagues that you're in, when you put them into Dynasty Daddy and you kind of look at all the stuff, how are you doing in your leagues based off of your data?
Oh, yes. Well, the one that I care about, my friend's league, I am the probably best team. I've been to the finals 3 out of the past 4 years. And, I got Kyler Murray and Josh Allen, Amon-Ra, CeeDee Lamb. So I'm feeling pretty confident there. It is an IDP league, and we're moving to a start 10. So there's some changes, but it's still a somewhat shallow league, 12 teams. So having those hammers makes it really easy. And then I can kind of just fill, because I think we only do start 6 or 5 IDP players. So usually you can stream those outside of like the elite level edge rushers. And then my other leagues, I have one league that's a 12-team start 12. So it's very deep, but the benches are very shallow. So I'm trying to get those benches increased. The benches are like 10 people. And I'm like, we start more players than we have on our bench. So it's like very difficult because you have to consolidate, but you also don't want to consolidate too much. But that league, I was like a fringe playoff team for the first 2 years or so. And then last year I kind of blew it up because I was like, okay, I'm sick of being like the 5th seed and then winning 1 game and getting like the 110. So I blew it up, and then I drafted. I was like, it's a start 12. So I'm just drafting all these players. So yeah, I just finished my draft and got like Keon Coleman, Brian Thomas, Xavier Worthy, and Malik Neighbors. I'm like, now I don't have to worry about any flex spots. I'm just starting them, see which ones hit. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. I had to take Penix in the 2nd round, but I don't need a quarterback in that. And then my last league is, or not my last league, but I have some other ones. But the other one I focus on that has money is I'm just in the gutters. Like I'm by far one of the worst teams. So I need to be creative about getting out of that. But it's fun. It's something that I wanted to do a retool, and I wanted to do like a full rebuild because usually I go for like compete with like some flexibility. But when I started building the site, people started asking me for advice, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm like I know how to make a power ranking. I don't know if I can give you roster advice. So I was like, okay, I need to join leagues and just do random things and see how I get out of them. So that's why some of these I'm like, this is a weird situation. Like, I've never been in this. So, like, some of them I make some weird moves and then be like, okay, how do I react to this so I can actually give some good advice when people ask me for it? Just because people started asking me for advice, I'm like, I'm in 2 dynasty leagues. I don't know if you should ask me. But now I'm in a little bit more. So now I can, have a little bit more experience there.
That's fun. That is fun. No, I'm in 3 dynasty leagues total. So I don't try to go too hard in the paint when it comes to how many fantasy leagues I'm in. When it comes to dynasty, I'm not in very many redraft either. Like my home league and Scott Fishbowl. So there you go. So, all right, with your fantasy teams when you're rebuilding, because rebuilding is kind of scary too.
Yes, it is definitely
but when
scary.
you're rebuilding, like what kind of is the most frustrating part of going through a rebuild?
To me, it's always like knowing when to flip the switch, I think, right? Like, because the hardest part's going from a contender to retool. But again, even in that situation, it's like, okay, like when you retool, you can usually get some value and just say, okay, now I just wait for it to kind of realize that value. But when it's like, when your team is just bad and you don't have a ton of flexibility, it's like just grinding the margins and hoping anyone will give you that premium asset. Like for me, the way I approach it, I'm always like I think about it in like thresholds, right? Where like every player, I'm like, if every player blows their ACL, how will the community think about them, right? If I'm in a rebuilding league, if I'm like rebuilding, I don't want any player where I'm like, if they blow their ACL, they're worth like barely a second. Like I don't want that, because that like there's no reason for me to hold any player that loses their value if they have an injury like that. Now, if it's like, like a Anthony Richardson, it's like, okay, well I can, and I think that's the biggest advantage as a rebuild is like Anthony Richardson happens. There's always going to be an elite quarterback that suffers some long-term injury. Like I just sell everything. Like I remember last year, it was in my retool one, but like I had Herbert, Kyler Murray was out. I'm like, well, I'm retooling. So I traded Herbert for Kyler Murray in the first. And I'm like, whatever, like just give me any sort of like good quarterback and future first. Like that first value, you never know if it could be like the 102, the 103. It probably will be like the 109. But if it's like the 102, then all of a sudden your rebuild is kicked into high gear because now you have that shot at the premium asset, or you could trade that for a lot. So that's kind of my strategy. Every move you make as a rebuilder is about value, and you buy the dip on players that are going to regain value, like those young elite quarterbacks that get injured, and any player that can get injured that would lose value, like a Nick Chubb, where it's like terrible injury, but like now like people are trading them for like less than a second, and it's like like there's no need to have that like liability on your roster.
Yeah. Exactly. Man, you've given me things to think about for after this show, so I can go try to make some trades and try to do some stuff in these teams that I have to retool, because I said I was in 3 and there's probably 2 that I really need help with. That's why, that's why Dynasty Daddy is there, for me to go and actually spend some time. And, it's fun to flip through, but sometimes I don't have enough time to like sit there and like go through it. I really need to sit down and just go through all, because there's so much awesome stuff on there. But anyway, let's talk about what you like to do in your free time when you have free time. I know that there is a lot going on in your life, but what do you like to do when you get downtime and you actually can go and, do what you want to do?
Yeah, that's a tough question, because I mean, managing a full website that has a lot of things on it takes up a lot of my time. So a lot of times it's kind of like, it's still weird to say, but I feel like I'm still in like a honeymoon period with the site, where like a lot of times in my free time, like we'll watch TV after work, and like I'm just like, okay, like instead of scrolling Reddit or something, I'll just pull up my site and mess around with it and be like, okay, like let me add this. So I do enjoy working on my site, and I think that's a big thing that's motivating for me. I mean, obviously, I play some video games. I play when I'm like a big Nintendo fan.
Okay.
So whenever Nintendo gives me like a good game, which is like maybe once a year, I'm like really excited about that. So that's something that I usually spend time on. And I played a lot of like Super Smash Brothers Melee back in the day. So sometimes I get the itch to play that because that game's like the best game ever.
Okay, I was going to ask what the best game ever was.
But that's a game where it's like I could play forever. but I also know that I do a lot with my hands, and I don't want to, like, especially competitive melee is very, very physically taxing on the hands. And I'm like, also I code for like 70 hours a week. So I probably shouldn't. I should probably need to take care of my hands. But I try to work out. I'm not always the best with that. But I do spend time working out. And then, weekends I'll go out to like a brewery with some friends and things like that. And, I like watching sports. We'll go watch, I had a ton of fun with NC State Final Four trip. That was every weekend was just crazy. Like we watched the Final Four game on campus, which was really cool. I debated going to Phoenix, but I was like, I don't want to go to Phoenix and sit in the nosebleeds of an NFL stadium to watch a basketball game. But it's fun. It's fun to watch like those sports games, and I'll probably go to like an NC State game because the Panthers games are just not good. They're not good right now. Maybe Tepper will throw a beer on me, but other than that, there's not much of a reason to go.
I mean, then you'd have a story to tell, and yeah, it would be lovely. At least you'd have something like maybe not positive, but something memorable.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping. I'm always optimistic. I always tell my wife, I'm always like, I have hope, and she's like, don't give me that because I know it's going to get torn away from you, but I'm like, I do have hope. I have hope this year. My hope is much more realistic. Like if we win like 6 or 7 games, I'll feel good. I just need to see that Bryce Young isn't a bust. That's all I need to see.
There you go. Yeah.
If I could say we have a quarterback, then I'll feel good about it.
Yeah. I'm sure you're not the only person who feels that way about their team. Like we have a quarterback, but I'm a Cowboys fan. So I'm also like, oh man, I remember the good old days. They're there, and I was a big Cam Newton fan too when he was playing. So
he's my favorite player ever. I mean, he was electric in Charlotte. Yes. Like it was just like I know people like to hate on him, but like to me, I'm just like before him I was kind of falling out of love with football, and I watched him and I was just like, this guy is like, every game was just amazing. Like even the bad games, like it was just like so exciting to watch him. And he was one that like I know he doesn't get seen as like a Tom Brady, but when it's like 2 minutes left, I'm like, Cam Newton has the ball. I would always feel really confident. It's like I haven't felt that in a long time watching my team. It's like, it was just so exciting, and just the way he played. And I think he also, a lot of offenses now kind of take a lot of ways that Carolina Cam Newton experiment kind of was, and like you see that with like Lamar Jackson and things like that, where it's like they're taking it to the next level. But I just feel like Cam Newton as an athlete was so unique. Like he was such a power running quarterback that pre-shoulder injury could air it out. Like it was just must watch TV. I still watch highlights of that 2015 team way too much,
man.
And that Thanksgiving game against your Cowboys was one of my favorites.
Yeah, not. I
was so upset. Gosh. I was so upset about. That was when Tony Romo came back.
Yeah,
and they were favored. They were favored in Vegas over like a 10-0 Panthers team, and I'm like, you're 3-7. Like what? I'm like, with all due respect, Tony Romo's good, but he's not like prime Patrick Mahomes here.
There's my favorite player though, Tony Romo. So yeah. We all fell in love with our quarterbacks.
I did like Tony Romo. He was a fun quarterback.
Yeah, he was a fun quarterback. I mean, fun, but he also hurt my feelings a lot.
Yes.
So. Okay, so free time, cool. You like to work on your app, your site, and everything. Your site is, and you know what? That's what you wanted. That's your passion project, and that's awesome. That's something that gives you joy to do outside of like working and doing all of that. So that's really cool. Do you? Have you ever been to like the Fantasy Football Expo, or have you ever participated in the Scott Fish Bowl?
I have not. I'm fairly new to everything.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about going to the expo this year. I think that last year I had FOMO. I was like, I felt bad. I was like, I feel like I could go, and like people would like want to talk to me.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to go, and I want to try to go this year. So that's a goal of mine, is kind of like planning to go. But I'm also like, I also have no idea like what I need to bring. Like, should I get a booth? Like, what does all that look like? So but I need to figure that out soon. before all the booths get booked up.
Yeah, I got a booth, so I'm excited. It's my first year having a booth though, but yeah, it's I like to bring it up on the show just because I think it's such a well of knowledge. There's just so many
Mm-hmm.
people there that are like you get to meet so many new people, and like I've had so many people come on my podcast because I met them at the expo. So I'm like, it's kind of a dope thing. So speaking of dope things, because I'm sure your friends do your friends come to you for fantasy football advice? How about that? I know that you were talking about people coming to you because of the site, but do your friends come to you for fantasy advice?
Yes, I have a few friends that will like text me. They'll be like, "Who do I start?" or something, and I'm like, to be honest, like who do we know? Who do we know we should start? You know, you never know when
You don't know.
some random player scores 3 touchdowns. But I get like those questions a lot from friends. And I have one friend that is in a league, and he's like, I don't want to draft. He's like, I don't want to deal with the draft. So I drafted for him last year, and he made the playoffs and got pretty far. But previously, my other friend drafted for him the year before that, and he got fired. He got fired from the GM rules. So I'm happy I'm brought back. I'm brought back for a second year.
Good job.
Yeah, so I'll be doing his draft this year. But yeah, I mean, I have some friends that kind of are like, oh, he's the fantasy guy. I don't think they really realize what I build or how passionate people are in the community and like passionate about the thing I did build. But they do know that they're, Dynasty Daddy is a thing. Like I have like my mother-in-law got like this laser engraving thing, and I said I might get a booth, and she's been like designing all these booth signs, and I'm like, well, I guess I have to get the booth now. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, so there's people that are very supportive of me, but it is cool to kind of have. It's kind of like an alter ego in a way of like you have your real life, like people at work and stuff don't know I do this, and it's just like then I after work, I'm apparently a fantasy guru.
Yeah, your secret identity. So
my secret identity is Dynasty Daddy. Half the battle was just getting people to click on my site.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, like, as a Dynasty Daddy, like I know what it is, but
Yeah, I don't know. In hindsight, I always think like, did I pick the wrong name? Because I also like for example, like Dynasty Daddy works pretty well with redraft leagues. But like it's called Dynasty Daddy, so everyone's like, oh, it's only used for dynasty leagues. But like, the ranking tools, the simulators, all of that, it's literally just redraft. Like you could just plug your redraft leagues in and use it. So it's like, but I'm like, okay, like I started off focusing on Dynasty, and it's also too like a lot of the sites. The reason I picked it, I was like, alliteration is good, and I wanted people to remember my site because I know I don't have some big content network propping me up. So I was like, I need something that people are going to hear it. They're going to go to it and be like, that was memorable. Like you're going to remember Dynasty Daddy. Whereas there's other sites out there that like, I'm like, how would someone really like be like, that's a weird name. That's a name that stuck out. So that was kind of like, I was like, I need a name that's like kind of funny that people would remember. Because when I'm as a website, you get so like such little time in front of people. That's like, and my impression, like your first impression is like your URL and like kind of like your homepage and like, like I go to a ton of websites and I'm not like, okay, like this website's this, like I needed just a way for people to remember it. So I thought that's a memorable name that also is, not like some weird URL. Cause there's a bunch of weird URLs. I was like, I want something that's like a .com, something that's easy and easy to remember.
Definitely. Well, something that's going to be memorable. That's a hard word to say. I don't know how you said it so good. Memorable. Wow. I was going to try to do a cool, transition here, but it didn't turn out very well. So anyway, this will be a memorable podcast for me, the interview, because I fangirled about you and your website because it's so helpful. But before we go, can you just let everybody know one more time, like where they can find your stuff and where they can find you and what you got going on?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, dynastydaddy.com. There's a hyphen in it. I'm trying to get rid of that, but whoever owns dynastydaddy.com just has it on auto renew and won't respond to my emails. So It is Dynasty-Daddy, but you can just Google it. But that's the best spot. I mean, I will say they're my favorite tools.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people do enjoy using them for your dynasty and redraft leagues. So definitely go there. We have a free Discord you can ask your trade questions. You can ask all of that, but you can also see constant updates. That's the hard part. Like I can't just release a video. It's like a feature, but I try to put updates in there pretty often. So that's a great place to go. And if you have any bugs, also go there. And then there's also the Patreon. If you don't want ads, if you want to support my site, or if you want to use other premium features like the cross league platform tools and things like that. I mean, obviously I have socials too, if you want to follow me on Twitter or whatever. But that definitely go, check out the Discord, check out, the Patreon if you want to support me financially. But, I mean, at least give my site a shot. It's free. I'm not going to take anything from you. And hopefully you can kind of come away with that from the site with some actionable moves to do in your dynasty leagues.
Definitely go check out Dynasty Daddy. Please, dynasty-daddy.com. Jeremy's got so much awesome, he's got so much awesome tools over there. Like, you're going to go over there and look at it and be like, wow, he wasn't kidding. Like, this is awesome. So please definitely go check that out. Please let Jeremy know you listened, and make sure you come back next week for another episode of Get Real with Kacey Kasem. And remember to stay rad.
Get real. Time to get real, everybody.